Yeah, maybe. We're live. I don't know why it took 8 minutes to go live, but it took 8 minutes to go live for episode 3.
Are you introducing this one?
You ready to record? Mm-hmm. All right, here we go. Ready?
Yeah, well, I want you to stop screwing the cap on because it picks up all your noises.
I like the screw. All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Strength and Success Show, or podcast. I don't think we've even decided on which one that's going to be yet. People are popping on, it's cool. You guys can drop questions on there on the live, which we record here. This is episode 3, which is...
We're not looking for perfect?
We're not looking for perfect. That's the name of this episode. We are not looking for perfect. What are we looking for?
Progress.
Specifically, measurable progress, because we have everyone who likes to nitpick. I'm sorry, I almost talked over you, but I think I caught you quick.
I wasn't going to say anything.
People like to nitpick and they're looking for perfect, and I'm very much like a details guy, but it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be about making measurable progress of some kind. So if you can do 5 reps instead of 4 reps with the same weight, that's progress, and they may not always look great. This actually started, Riley said this in the gym, that phrase, we're not looking for perfect. But somebody shared a post with me yesterday from Squat University. And it said, lifter A squats 650 pounds with a hip shift and knee cave. And lifter B squats 500 pounds with ideal technique and no hip shift. And lifter B is more impressive, discuss. And I'm like, that's not how powerlifting works, though. I mean, if you're a physical therapist, absolutely, you're going to be more impressed with the guy who has ideal form, no default, things, modifications going on. He never said the guy was in pain. So maybe lifter A has a hip shift and has knee cave, but if he has no pain, why does that matter? It's asymptomatic. That may be from prior injury, like an ankle injury or hip injury that he's had. The fact that he's squatting 650. Because open powerlifting is going to detract the guy who has 650 as much more impressive than the guy who squats 500 if they're in the same weight class. So it kind of got my mind turning a little bit about, what we're really looking for with strength success, and that's progress. And we lose sight of that because we're always looking for perfect. People will nitpick and record every single freaking set they do and nitpick it apart, and they'll spend 3 hours in the gym just to get through 6 sets of squats, which drives me insane because that's a waste of time. Film your first set, film your last set. So with me as always is Riley Prisma. You're gonna drop the hello?
No, because it's not the same if I'm not waving.
I'm going to drop the hello.
It's not the same if I'm not waving.
Hello.
And, I get that you want to try to be like me, but you can never do the hello like me.
I'm progressing, though. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for progress.
Well, in this we're looking for perfect.
We did get questions offline. People can drop them online. It is so fun to do this live, by the way. And then if you don't get to tune in for the entire live, I do upload this to my page. But you can also listen to the podcast if you're driving in your car. We release it on Monday, so it's pretty cool. We got a lot of people on here that's really awesome. So if you have questions, drop them. We did have some questions before. We always answer strength questions, and then we talk about some things that are more personal development based or success based. And one day I'd really like to sit down and define success because it's so different for every individual. So what are some of the questions we had?
Well, Gabby asked how long will the seminar be on Saturday and how many snacks do I need to bring? The question is, you bring all of the snacks.
All the snacks.
And the seminar usually goes...
usually about 9 to 3 with a lunch break in there, and then we tend to lift around 3.
Yeah, usually lunch break for an hour because I get hangry if I don't get snacks, and Trevor definitely gets hangry if he doesn't get snacks.
I actually started hangry. It just calms me to feed. I'm just a hangry person.
Another question was, what lifts can you do with a torn meniscus?
Without giving medical advice, so many people actually have probably one of the most common injuries is a torn meniscus, and it's just a flap of cartilage that sits between the knee. It looks like a butterfly. It sits on both sides, and you have your medial meniscus and your lateral meniscus. I've torn my left one slipping off my driveway many years ago.
Pretty sure I've torn mine back in track.
Yeah, so, it's super common. It's super common. While it's painful, you probably can't do too much because it's inflamed and you need to get the inflammation out. The actual rehab is literally just things like Peterson step-ups and 10 minutes of cycling every day to flush blood through it to get the inflammation out. But you're going to want to strengthen knee stability, which really is hip stability, hence the single leg work of the Peterson step up and just flexing and extending the knee under small ranges of motion so you build up that hip stability from the single leg work. Once you've cleared the inflammation, you're clear to do all exercises. It's certainly not like a death sentence type injury, not that any injury really is, but it's not one that's going to hold you back from much. It's just more like a 3 to 4 week recovery if you're consistent. Consistency is always the key. Cycling every day for 10 minutes and then doing the Peterson step-ups 3 times 12 to 15 every day to work on that hip stability so the knee is more stable.
I find that that's what gets irritated the most on me, from excessive squatting, is that part of my knee. And I do 10 minutes of cycling before lifting, I do the Peterson step-ups often because you program those for me. And then I also do a fuck ton of hip stability work because Trevor writes my program and because of sumo, and that's something that I'm lacking. So the only time that that part of my knee starts to bother me is when I don't do those things, or like when I'm not focusing on hip stability, when I'm not doing riding the bike or anything like that. So preventatively, you should be doing these things anyways. Like hip stability is great for all of your lifts. So these are things that you should be doing regardless.
Right. It's just a question of how much people freak out about that. Like, oh, you don't need warm-ups, so you just need this. Like, dude, you do what you want. It's an individual sport.
If it makes you feel good, I don't see like the big deal. We've talked about this before where people are like, well, don't warm up, just get under the barbell.
Right.
And it's like, okay, yeah, that's great. But if it makes me feel physically good to do a couple like hip airplanes and like glute bridges before I go squat, I don't understand what the big fucking deal is about it.
It's the dumbest argument.
It is.
It really is. Like, you don't need flavored water, you don't need soda, you don't need alcohol. No, you don't. You do it because you want to.
Yeah, it's semantics. It's just like arguing semantics.
Yeah, it's so dumb.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It's really irritating. Like, how about you just let people do what it is that they like to do, and if they're successfully lifting, successfully progressing, and doing like well with their training, it really probably doesn't fucking matter whether or not you like their warm-ups or not.
No, it really doesn't. And it doesn't affect you in any way. You know, you do you, boo, as they say. You do you. And as long as I'm not lifting you and serving my clients, fuck you.
Next question was, there's a lot of argument on internal rotation. Is it better to turn feet in a bit for conventional deadlift?
We have to go through both internal and external rotation as we squat, and in some cases, deadlift. You'll see that, and people freak out about the knees coming in, and sometimes that's caused from being at the end range of external rotation like too much. You have to have room to do both. This specific question was done towards the conventional deadlift about internally rotating. It's preference. You know, I've seen larger individuals need to have their toes flared out so their knees can get out, and I've seen some people who are long and lengthy who can go very narrow and turn their toes in to have a very short grip. Yeah, the pigeon toe style. This argument comes down to, because people who are pigeon-toed or toes come in, it is a phenom of hip mobility. You can see them jump higher, and oftentimes you can see them run faster from their stride length, and sometimes it creates more hip torque and power to have that hip internal rotation. Say, for example, like a wide receiver who's able to stop on a dime right before the foul line, outside, I don't even remember what it's called. I'm a guy, I don't even know football terms anymore. And be able to turn back in. That's hip internal rotation torque. For some people, it can help you deadlift more conventionally. If you don't have that pigeon toe and you're trying to force it and deadlift that way, and you're unable to externally rotate now because of that, it's probably going to hinder your performance more than it helps your performance. It always comes down to body style. Like someone like Klokov, who's like bow-legged, he tends to internally rotate to lift, but then he lands in external rotation. Are you going to tell Klokov he's wrong? You know, silver medalist in the Olympics and World Championships. It's not that he's wrong, but he's found the best way to lift for him. And with all these arguments, I always laugh. It's like, sometimes they make sense in theory, but they don't make sense in application because of individual differences. So my best recommendation is try it. If it feels like you can generate a lot more torque off the floor and a lot more hip extension power and you like it, keep it. If you try it and it feels god-awful, it's not going to work for you.
Realistically, whatever way you can put your feet, that's going to allow you to stay firmly rooted and not have your feet complacent, and you're actually like pushing through the ground, applying pressure, and effectively moving is fine. I don't think that it necessarily matters. Like I like to squat toes flared out, but I like to pull conventional with that slight pigeon toe. So it's like there's not like a one size fits all for every sort of movement, every sort of person, whatever you can do to get the most pressure in like pushing the ground away, keeping your feet rooted, whatever you want to call it, I think is what you should use.
It depends on your hip socket. Do you have a shallow hip socket or, a long hip socket? Because that's what's going to force it. People who have shallow hip sockets can't go into internal rotation and get their knee all the way up, so they don't have the same hip and range of motion. So it's morphology specific. You can't say this is the best for everyone.
And also don't just do it because someone that you like on Instagram does that and they're built somewhat similarly to you. You may not know that.
Yeah, that's the outlier argument. Like, I saw so-and-so squatting this way, so I'm going to try it. Like, yeah, cool, you can try it, but it probably works better for him than you because you're not him.
Yep. Next question was, for a water cut, what do you consider an ideal loss amount? Over 10, under 10, etc.?
This is my pet peeve subject. I don't consider any weight cut to be ideal. It's a game you play and a risk you take, If it is a water cut, they say the upper limits of safety are 10% of your body weight. Now, I've done a 9.8% water cut. It was not fun, and it 100% affected my performance. I left better numbers in the gym than I did on that platform, and it was one of the, at the time, the biggest meet I'd ever done, which was Run Unity 7. So it has a major impact on your performance. You have to accept that. If you are going to cut water, if you're cutting 2 or 3%, that's super easy through manipulation. It's just uncomfortable because you're going without fluids for 24 hours and usually carb and sodium manipulation. So it's not fun. It's uncomfortable, but it's not that hard. If you're looking to do more than 5% of water manipulation, I'm using percentage, not pounds, because it depends on what you weigh. Once you get past 5%, you're probably going to have to start doing some sweating tactics like sauna and hot baths or whatever, and a lot more depletion. And then it gets harder and harder to recover from that and still be able to perform. Some people can do massive cuts, 8, 9, 10% and perform great. And other people will lose 1 or 2% and shit the bed. So it's one of those things that eventually you're going to try the longer you power lift. But unless you're significantly in the running for invite meets, the money of the meet, the top 5, or like top 25 or 30 placings, you probably shouldn't be doing that. It's more detrimental than it is beneficial. But I would say, and I agree with this, that if you are planning to be at that level, you do need to cut ahead of time to know what it feels like and how you're going to recover and perform.
Get some experience.
So a great way to kind of do that, if you have never competed in a cut before, is do the protocol where you cut before like a deload week, see how well you recomp, rehydrate, and how you feel while you're moving the deload weights. And if you can't blast through those deload weights like they're lightning, cutting isn't for you.
Yeah, I think the average lifter that's not like going for these big money meets, I feel like your best benefit is just training at the weight that you plan on competing at. Yeah. So if you're a 148 or a 165, making sure that you're staying at the 148 to 165 range, so that way you're always training where you're comfortable, unless you plan on cutting eventually. But for the average person, I don't think that cutting is really that big of a deal. If you're like only sitting 2 to 3 pounds above your weight class and you can't like restrict, or not, I don't want to say restrict, you can't like have enough self-control to get yourself down to that weight class, I feel like that is probably, you should reevaluate your diet a little bit with that, in my personal opinion. But I don't generally recommend water cuts or massive cuts for the people that aren't doing, world records, high-level records, invite meets, all that stuff. So I agree.
Yeah, and if you're cutting to be like competitive in a subclass category in like Titusville, Florida, in a meet that doesn't matter, you're wasting your time. Don't do it. Just enjoy the meet and some cake and some cookies, or
cookies.
Gabby's snacks, which is usually like Skittles.
Another question is conventional deadlifts. Is it a bad thing the barbell is about an inch away from my shins when I begin my pull?
Yes, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. Kills you. Death by 1 inch away. I mean, the Bruce Lee 1 inch punch, right?
I think I'm about an inch away from the barbell when I pull, because I have a pretty solid like knee forward quad drive conventional pull. So I know that that's the stronger part of my pull. My conventional specifically is that I have strong quads, so I want to use them to generate the force off the floor. So I will stand about it probably is about an inch away from the barbell, maybe an inch and a half, so that way I can really drive my knees forward, get into my quads, and then explode up.
I would also like to get into your quads.
They are nice pillows.
Yeah, they're nice.
I think that this depends on body type, body weight. Generally, it seems like smaller lifters do have to get a little bit further away from the barbell, so that way they can kind of use their legs to essentially create more mass for themselves, versus someone who is a heavier lifter is likely probably going to want to be a little bit closer, so that way they're not getting pulled forward or like losing balance, and just kind of focusing on standing straight up instead of getting the drive. And they also have the mass to just kind of propel themselves up out of the hole.
Yeah, that was a question that was further down there that I answered with all of my story yesterday, where somebody was asking about anchoring for a conventional deadlift. And anchoring for a conventional deadlift doesn't work unless you are a heavier deadlifter. So if you're 130 pounds and you're trying to anchor a conventional deadlift and you're the person that has their knees over the bar, you're not already anchoring, you shouldn't be anchoring. But the heavier set individual or more massive individual usually has to have that almost vertical shin.
Yep.
and bar against the shin and then anchor their weight back to get some help to get them off the floor, whereas the smaller lifter shouldn't anchor at all for a conventional pull. I'm not talking about sumo, I'm talking about conventional, because that anchor is going to pull them back away from the bar and pull their hips away from the bar, where the heavier set lifter is already struggling to get their hips to the bar, so they should anchor their weight a little bit into the bar. The lighter lifter, should have a little bit of space where they can push their knees over the bar and leg press the floor away, get the tension out, and then just basically leg press with their quads and then worry about hip extension.
I see that a lot with some heavier set lifters, like where they like to roll the barbell, right?
So they can breathe, yeah.
Yeah, so like that's fine and all, but then when they're coming to roll it back into themselves, they're not taking the time to actually get that bar back tight to them before they start. So then they're starting with the barbell like 3 inches away from their shins, and they're pulling forward, and then they get the weird hitch, and then they can't lock it out, and they get stuck right at the lockout because they don't have any power anymore because they used it from reaching forward to grab the barbell. So if you're someone who like rolls it forward and pulls it back into you, you have to really, really focus hard on getting that bar super, super tight to you before you go.
Yeah, we had a seminar where there was like a 130-pound woman who was doing it. I'm like, do you know why you're doing that? She's like, no. I'm like, you saw it on YouTube, didn't you? She's like, yeah. Benedict Magnuson clips, they're great. His amp up is like, so cool. But yeah, the bigger athlete often has to do that so they can take their breath and their brace at the bottom because of the mass they have. So they roll the bar away to get the air and then come back in tight. But there's a hesitation before they pull. They don't just roll and yank. Yeah. And that's what this person was doing, just rolling and yanking. And you also run the risk of an uneven platform shifting that bar. I've seen that more often than I haven't. So the roll technique is better suited to strongman than it is powerlifting. Mm-hmm. Because in strongman, they have the giant figure 8 straps, the elephant bar, and then sometimes cool shit like tire wheels and whatnot. But in our platform that gets pretty dented when people bring bars or drop bars down, it's not always the safest or best play to use. And if you don't need to do it to breathe, don't do it.
Okay. I think you answered this one on your question, but kind of relates to like anchoring. Wedging gets thrown around a lot, but I'd be interested to hear your breakdown of it and how to improve it.
I did answer this, so we'll go into a little more detail because this is a hot topic right now. Because like if you understand Stu McGill's method, he uses the term creating a lifter's wedge, which is what he's using about talking about bracing, getting so tight with the bar, whether it's squat or deadlift. And then a lot of people who follow Dr. Pat Davidson recently are talking about not wedging, just letting the hips relax and letting the shoulders relax so you can create a longer lever as far as your arm length. And they're talking about thoracic rounding, but both are emphasizing bracing. Bracing is diaphragmatically breathing and bringing all this down so your torso is tight, and that's where people lose. Never knew why people did that. Good info things. Oh, that's awesome. He's talking about the deadlift. But people lose sight of things because of the verbiage. They're really talking about the same thing. The lifter's wedge is McGill's verbiage to talk about bracing, and Pat Davidson's talking about learning breathing mechanics through postural restoration and using the diaphragm to anchor your torso together with your hips, your shoulders and torso with your hips. But he's more a fan of the long thoracic, so if you wedge and you tighten up so much, you might not be able to get your shoulders down. Some people will thoracically round, some people know how to pack their shoulders down and depress their scapula. If you're really, really technical and you're savvy and aware, you know how to do both very effectively. An example of that would be Konstantin Konstantinov, who had thoracic rounding, depressed shoulders, a huge wedged belly. It's really just verbiage. It's bracing. And the way I like to look at it is like, did you slack out of the bar or not?
Yeah.
I don't give a shit what verbiage you use. If there's space between you and the bar where the bar can click or move or your hips can move away from the bar, you did not slack out. That's really all that matters. I don't care what technique you choose to use. It's going to be individual to the person. You either slacked out or you didn't. And the slack is not in the bar. The slack is in you. So have you pulled the slack out of your body so much more so than the bar? Because the bar is an inanimate object. It doesn't do anything you don't tell it to do or make it do. You have to tell your body where to be in space to get that tension out so you can create the most torque possible.
Lifters get really nervous about the thoracic rounding because I know it doesn't look pretty.
You're rounded back, bro.
Yeah. It doesn't. I have a couple lifters who pull with like a slightly more kyphotic thoracic rounded posture, and they pull pretty. I mean, small 132-pound girls pulling in like the mid 4s. She's obviously a good puller and she has some thoracic rounding. People give her some shit about it, and like, yeah, it's not the prettiest. It doesn't look like all the forms that were drawn in books and whatever, but she's obviously doing something right if she's able to pull 400 in the mid 4s at such a low body weight.
Right.
So she's learning how to create slack, like Trevor said. She doesn't really wedge, but she braces into the bar. Yeah, like
brace and tension. The thoracic rounding is to elongate the arms, and if it's thoracic rounding and not lumbar rounding, it's not that big of a deal as long as you know how to then thoracically extend to get back to the finished position. So.
Yeah, she hates it because people give her a hard time about that. She's always like, people are giving me shit about my form, and I'm like, just tell those people mine.
What a coincidence. We're measuring progress, not perfection, right?
So
right? So if I've lifted more than you and I figured out a way to leverage my body, am I doing it wrong?
No.
I mean, somebody was talking about that. I don't remember what coach it was, but he's really arrogant. And he was saying that, the way like Arnold, Yates, and Coleman lifted was as what's the word he used? Not less than ideal, subpar. He's like, they could have had better results. I'm like, dude, 7 Olympias, 9 Olympias. They could have had better results. What do you want them to be, God?
Where are your Olympias?
Where are your Olympias? Where are your Olympia caliber athletes? You have none, but you have really strong opinions, which is awesome. And I'm sure some of the education is beneficial, but that's like a gross overstatement.
Yeah.
That what they were doing was suboptimal. It's like, dude, they are literally the best. I'm sorry they didn't hire you to be their Olympia coach. Maybe that's why.
Clearly they would have done better.
Let's see. Oh, we got a question. Feet flat versus heel elevated for bench press. How do you determine which is best for the individual? Test them. That's the simple answer. The other answer that's a little bit more complex is what does your federation allow? If you compete in the USAPL, you have to have flat feet. So all of your arching is going to come from thoracic extension and using your feet to drive and wedge back. One of the best examples of that is Sean Noriega. He has a very, very cool thoracically extended back, belly up nice and high. He meets the bar halfway with his position. He's one of the best at doing that arch with a flat foot. I would say the Swedish kid, I don't remember his name, but he's like the best at 148 or 132. It's like a 500 or near 500 bench, and his range of motion is like 2 inches. He was a gymnast, so his thoracic mobility is just insane. So really that's the most important thing is how much thoracic extension mobility you can get, how high can you get the belly to rise the sternum, how tight can you get between your back and shoulders. Whether your feet are tucked or flat doesn't matter as much. Now, there's a caveat to tucked feet is you're not going to be as stable with your feet tucked back as you are with your feet flat. Flatter feet and wider feet is going to be more stability. So it depends upon what kind of bench press you have. If you have a little bit of a sink and a launch style, you're going to get more power with tucked feet. That's going to just give you more power. If you have a very soft touch, light touch, no sink, and a drive style with your arm base, you're probably going to want flatter feet because you're going to be able to use more arm strength because you are in a more stable position. So the flatter feet give you more stability, the tucked feet give you more of a spring and rebound, but you're going to lose stability at the top, so you'll tend to see a lot of people miss at the very top in lockout. Even though their triceps are strong, they miss because they become unstable.
That and also the way that you do your leg and body drive, I think is important too, because like if you're trying to be a high arch with your feet tucked, but you're trying to basically hip pop, butt pop with your leg drive, your ass is going to come off the bench every single time. So if you're trying to use an aggressive leg drive with like a high arch and a feet tucked back, you're going to pop off the bench. You're going to get red lighted for that. So you have to learn how to keep tension constantly in your legs, whether that's squeezing the bench, driving your knees out, whatever it is that makes sense to you to hold yourself in a position, because it's less of a leg launch with like the high arch and the feet tucked than with feet flat. With feet flat, you're going to want to focus more on like pushing the toes through the front of your shoes. Some people think about kicking when their feet are
kicking,
flat.
leg extending. Yep.
Yeah, so that way you're flexing the quad and driving back instead of just popping up.
Yeah, that's the big misnomer. People think leg drive, they end up popping up and their butt pops off. But the leg drive is trying to literally push your body back behind the bar, so you should be pushing this way, not this way.
Yeah.
It's really hard for people to learn that. So if you don't know that, keep your feet flat and just keep yourself wedged and tight. And don't even worry about leg drive, just worry about tension. Gabby joined, and we talked about the snacks in the beginning, Gabby. Bring enough for everybody. Sharing is caring.
One other question from the Q&A was, I recently read about folks getting some diastasis, I think I said that.
Diastasis recti.
Diastasis recti from improper bracing when lifting heavy. How could one protect against it and build back from it?
So diastasis recti, are you familiar with it?
It's the separation of the abdominal walls.
Yeah, the linea alba separates. It's more common in like pregnant women. Mm-hmm. Some of them have to have it reattached or sewn together.
It's more often found in pregnant women, like in the elderly, and then I think men have a higher chance of getting it, like from weightlifting, than women do.
We just call it a hernia.
I mean, the thing about
Coach, you got a hernia.
The thing about trying to protect against it, because if you're aware that it comes from improper bracing, then you should probably focus on properly bracing.
Riley's blind and can't read without her glasses, but he says, "Thank you for talking about that butt pop, Riley. Amazing info."
You're welcome. But yeah, so if you know that that comes from improper bracing, then the fix there would be to focus on your bracing and improve your bracing. I know that like for recovery for that's what they focus on, is they focus on a lot of like internal and external obliques, transverse abdominis. Like they focus on a lot of that core strength there and getting core control, building up like the low back muscles, improving breathing to where you're actually diaphragmatic breathing, not just chest breathing. But that would be one way to protect against it and build back from it, is just focusing on your bracing and focusing on your core musculature and your low back musculature. I don't see that happening too often in powerlifting.
I mean, hernias, more so in strongman because of the odd objects and movements, but, simply just put a belt on.
Yeah.
Everybody argues beltless, not beltless. The info is looking like for squats, you can create more intra-abdominal pressure and apply more force and actually brace better with the belt on or some type of mechanism. I know the breath belt's out right now and people are using that to kind of reinforces that as a proprioceptive tool. And that's really the key to it, is put them on when you need it. Don't be like a hero. I do like beltless squat work because I think it builds confidence under the bar, that if you've gotten stronger without the belt, you've gotten stronger with the belt kind of thing. Beltless training tends to carry over better for deadlifts than it does for squats, because you're building the erector spinae when you're deadlifting without the belt more so, where they can be a little bit more relaxed and rely on the belt when you're deadlifting. So just take that in consideration. If it's heavy enough or scary enough, put a fucking belt on.
I think my sumo is irritating for me because I feel like my beltless pull is only like 40 pounds less than like my belted pull. Super irritating. But with a caveat with the belt thing, with squats specifically, I find that people are trying to wear their belt way too tight and then they're breathing around it, or chest breathing. Like they have their belt so tight that it's like two muffins on top of each other because their belt is cinched in so tight. And then they go to breathe and then they can't do anything except for extend because they can't breathe into the belt because there's actually no space there. And they're just chest breathing and not actually getting any brace. So yeah, wearing a belt is cool, but it's just a tool. It's not meant to create the artificial brace for you. You still have to brace into the belt.
That's it. Brace into the belt. So breathe into the belt, where a lot of people make the mistake of breathing above the belt instead of breathing into the belt. Yeah. So make that belly thick all the way around. If you have a belt on, you can't feel the air coming into your lower back, you're not bracing.
Yep.
Got a question here because you talked about the leg drive, and he's putting it on sumo or conventional. Sorry. Any tips to cue or engage leg drive during a conventional deadlift? Oddly enough, yeah. It's not even a tip. It's more of a tool. Low handle trap bar deadlifts. Mm-hmm. So most people who lose the ability to leg drive will learn very fast when the hands are at their sides instead of the front of how to engage and drive with the quads. This is something I did in the beginning a lot with Charlie Binkley, who was needing to learn how to deadlift, and his deadlift has gone from like the mid 5s to the mid 7s. 738 I think was in his comp at 198, and that was something we did a lot. Was we actually did low handle banded trap bar deadlift, so we really focused on getting tight and then basically driving through the floor, because you're going to use a lot more quad drive in the trap bar deadlift than you would in the conventional deadlift because of the placement of the bar. Caveat to that is using the low handles, not the high handles. Some of the handles are so high, it's just basically like a rack pull at that point. It's useless. So with the trap bar, if you're a sumo puller, you can use the high handles of like a standard trap bar. It's not that big a deal. But if you are a conventional puller, you always want to use those low handles because it's more direct carryover to your conventional deadlift. So take a block where you're actually learning how to deadlift with the low handles of the trap bar. Ooh, some people are hearting us. I don't know what that means, but it's cool. It just popped a bunch of hearts up my screen. So trap bar deadlift, low handles, put some bands on there and get tense and worry about how much you can accelerate that up, and you'll learn how to quad drive in conventional.
Yeah, those are actually two of my favorite things, is the trap bar and then like banded conventional work.
How am I not in the top 2 list of favorite things?
Exercises.
Thanks for clarifying.
Deficit banded conventional is one way that I really learn how to use my legs, because if you don't use your legs there, then you're just stapled to the floor. That
was the actual progression we made. We went from like low handle trap bar to deficit conventional.
Yeah, and then again, you add the bands if you really hate yourself. So, yeah, that's fun.
Self-loathing is my second favorite thing. Notice how I said it's my second favorite thing.
What's your first?
You are.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Exercise.
We didn't have any more questions from the Q&A that you sent, so.
Oh, there's plenty more questions. I think I know I answered some. Oh, wait, we got. This is from you This is Chelsea, I think. How do I balance working on sumo technique while building strength in the lift? I get the mental block of trying to do it right every time. That's from Chelsea.
Yeah, well, so we've made a couple more adjustments recently in this last week to like your form to where it actually feels good. The problem is that you don't get excited about training sumo when we're working on sumo. The frequency is going to be what is probably going to benefit you. I like to keep the conventional in for you too, in case you ever decide to change your mind and go back to conventional, so that way you don't lose it. That's why I keep that lighter conventional in on your squat day. But like recently of doing like the deadlift to knee for like the high sets, like I think we had an 8x1 of the deadlift to knee, so that way you can just practice over and over again. So it's going to be a lot of probably inverted volume for you, where you're doing a lot more sets of a lot more 1, 2, and 3 reps. So that way you can get the practice of actually getting in the groove of hitting your technique. Also staying consistent with the technique that you've been working on. Like we just changed it to like slightly wider. I can't remember what else happened this week, but we changed it to slightly wider, making sure that we keep that same setup every time that you sumo, not trying to change 4 different things every time you sumo. So that way, you know, you're confused on which one's working, which one isn't working. That's why we change one thing. That's why you usually only get 1 cue, and I only give you 1 thing to work on before we progress to something else. Once I see that you have, squat down, thank you. Once I see that you have accurately applied the cue that I give you, that's when I'll give you another one. So this is where like analysis paralysis comes in for most lifters, is like they go to the bar and they're like, okay, I need to squat down, I need to stand with my feet wide, I need to push the floor, I need to set my lats, I need to row the barbell, I need to do all these things. And then it's like when you go to lift, there's so many things that you told yourself to do that you can't even remember the first one that you said. You usually end up messing up all of them because your brain can't do that many things at one time. So this is where trying to be overly analytical about everything is not super beneficial to you. So this is why I tell you a lot of the times to just do instead of thinking about what you're going to do. It would also benefit you to not overanalyze your lifts after every lift. Like I know that you send me 1 set before you do the second set, and then you record the second set, and then you send me the second set, and then you're stressing about how the second set moved when you're going into your third set, and then you're just overthinking everything. So I think for you, we need to do a little bit more of just doing, which you've been really good at. You've progressed really well with thinking less and doing more. And I think that we just need to kind of keep that.
I like the way Hicks and Gracie said it, of flow with the go. You know, instead of going with the flow, you flow with the go. And I really like that you talked about 1 cue, because we do get paralyzed by trying to think of 8 different things at once, and we can't function that way. We have to just think of one thing. And if you're doing a movement that is a technique builder, such as like deadlift to the knee or pause deadlift, what's the one thing you should be focusing on, and just making sure you're doing that. So with the deadlift to the knee, it's making sure you get thoracic extension. With the pause deadlift, it's making sure that you've pushed the knees out into external rotation, with the sumo deadlift at least. So looking at it in an aspect of, okay, what is my technique work supposed to be focusing on? And that's all I should be thinking on.
Yeah, that's generally why I don't give Matt like a million different cues each week, or, you know, like that's why week 1, I'll tell you 1 cue, and then week 2, I'll say, okay, we need to work on that again, or good, because you've applied it. Now I want to see you apply it again on week 3. So instead of me giving you 1 new cue every single week that I know you're not going to be able to apply, and maybe if you do apply one, you don't apply the other, I'd rather just focus on one thing for the whole block. And for Chelsea, it's been thoracic extension. She's getting better at bringing her hips to the barbell, but for Chelsea, it's been thoracic extension, and that is improving. So that's what I want to see continue to improve, rather than just throwing a whole bunch of new shit at you and then the thoracic extension is gone too.
Right. And somebody asked, any plans to do a seminar in California? As of right now, no. Maybe when I'm out there for the current U.S. Open, if you guys are out there, come say hello. Maybe I'll talk to Gracie or Ryan Rubio and see if that's something they want. The gyms that I do them at have reached out to me and asked me to come over there and do them. So I did have one that was supposed to be set up with Stacy a while ago, but it just logistically was a nightmare because it was in like Lodi, California, and there was no airports close. It just wasn't going to work cost-wise. So if there's gyms out there that you attend and they want to have us, maybe we will.
Yep. Do you want to answer more questions from the Q&A?
Sure. What do you got? You can answer them all.
I don't remember, because you answered a lot of these on your Q&A already.
I can answer them again. I can go into more detail here.
Ooh,
I like that one. I answered this one because we're talking about analysis paralysis, but top 5 reads on all things powerlifting. I get this question so often. What book should I read? What are the top 5 books I should read? And you know what? I hate answering with powerlifting information. I always talk about other books that people should read that have absolutely nothing to do with powerlifting. That pisses people off. And I've talked about this a lot, and it's even in the answer in my story to this. I'm a proponent of reading one book 5 times instead of 5 different books. I have an abundance of books in my house. I have a book buying fetish, apparently. Amazon knows exactly what I like. It's my kink to buy new books. I love the smell of books. But I don't often read them as fast as I would like to, or even at all. Sometimes they'll just sit there on the shelves. But I really want to absorb as much as I can from the book I'm reading. And then you will lose sight of what you read if you jump to a book that is the same subject that has a different opinion. So when it comes to powerlifting books, they're all citing the same studies, they're all citing the same information. It is that author's extrapolated opinion of the research he's reading. You can look at 10 different experts and ask them the same question, and they're going to get 10 different answers most likely, because that's their interpretation of the data. It doesn't mean that all 10 of them are wrong, and it doesn't mean that all 10 of them are right. It means this is what each one of them has found to be the most effective based off taking that data and then applying it in a test subject or clinical study that they're doing or clients they work with and seeing what actually works. And that's the best way to interpret it. If you want to know about programming, buy one book on programming. If you want to know about mechanics, buy one book on biomechanics. If you want to know about nutrition, you buy one book on nutrition. And then start applying and testing, not just on yourself, but on clients you work with or with training partners. And you can do this for free. People would love to have guidance and help. So if they can't afford help and you have people in your gym who are struggling or new, offer to coach them for free so you can then test and apply these things that you're reading and see if it works in the real world. Now, a neophyte or a new lifter is going to adapt to anything. When you have someone who's at the intermediate stage or the advanced stage, then you really know what works because you're trying to see over and over again if you can produce the same result. And I can tell you from 28 years of experience that everything works, but not everything works forever, and not everything works for everyone. There's going to be a nuance on what you choose and what you use, and reading more books isn't necessarily the answer. Yes, you should always stay educated, you should always stay on top of the current research and data, but you then have to take that data and apply it and see if it works in the real world and not just in the protocol they use. And I think that's where so many people go wrong online is they start pontificating. First, you have no leg to stand on in this fight. It's not even your data. It's somebody else's data. You actually haven't tested it on clients to see if it's effective and working. Because people will argue that this is the best way. It's like, no, dude, that's the best way for you. Have you had 10 clients have the exact same result with that technique? No, that's probably not the best way. It's a useful way for you and some of you, but not all of them. And I think people really lose sight of that, which is why this question can drive me up a wall sometimes, because they're looking for that one book that's going to give them the secrets. You know what the secret is? Testing, applying, and retesting, and applying, and retesting, and applying for so many years to see what gives you the most often result. Then when you take on a new client or you're doing your own programming, you can plug that in and see if it's working again. And chances are, probably 80% of the time, it probably will. It's that other 20% of the time where you really have to think, okay, what does this lifter need the most, and how can I achieve that?
Well, really, it's about paying attention too, right? So even if you're reading a bunch of books, but you're just like skimming through them because you're like, oh, I want to read 5 books about periodization. If you're not absorbing any of that information and paying attention to any of that information, it's not going to help you. Also, if you are being coached by someone, why not pay attention to what's working well for you and then trying to figure out if that can work well for other people or why it's working well for you. So paying attention to the program that you're running, seeing what's working well if you plan on coaching people, and then also pay attention, like we have social media, so we can pay attention and see what's working for other coaches. Like if you follow a couple coaches and you see like they have a lot of athletes doing well, paying attention and seeing like, okay, these exercises are going well, this coach is talking about this thing and it's supposed to help with this. Like, so just paying attention to all of the resources that you have is really underutilized as well. I think that people are so wrapped up in their own thought processes and like their own little niches that they forget that there are other people that exist and that there are other people that they can learn from. So like utilizing your resources and asking questions is another way to learn about practical application. I ask you questions. I ask everyone else other questions too if I find that like something is working or isn't working. But I'm always going to keep consistently testing, retesting, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, seeing what I like, seeing what type of lifters, the things that I like apply to. So it's really just like paying attention.
Yeah, and I talked about, instead of buying books, buy programs. People sell programs. Buy their programs and then look at what are the commonalities, what are the differences, why are they applying these things, what's the frequency like, what's the intensity like, what are they looking to achieve, what is the exercise selection like. So when you buy specific programs or ask athletes what programs are type of following and why, you'll learn more about how to program and what the troubleshoots are for a lot of different people, because you'll learn a lot more from the program than you will from the book, because that's actually applied.
Yeah, like I like the West Side Book of Methods, but not for like the actual legitimate program that they write out in there. I like to take like small little pieces of what he's written and see how I can apply that to raw, because that book's written for gear.
One of the best ways to learn about choosing accessory movements is going through not just the West Side Book of Methods, but all the old West Side articles that Louis wrote. Yeah. There's so many stories in there about why he chose specific accessory movements for athletes and why. There's like gems of gold in there. People will shit on him all day long because of geared lifting, and that's fine if you're not a geared lifter. But there's so much ideology there on where the movement of that, where the lifter was breaking down within that movement, and what exercise he chose to help them bring it up.
Yeah,
I think really great.
It's good, but whenever I recommend that book, I always have to give the caveat of like, now not everything here applies to raw. So.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so I like this question that just came through for the wrong reason. How fast can you gain strength without sacrificing tendons and ligaments health? Rate of strength gain. And I'm going to ask you that same question. I don't know, how fast can you? Tendon and ligament health, they get stronger the same way muscles get stronger. The only time that the muscles will get stronger faster than the tendons and ligaments is if you're overdoing the loading or using a heavy amount of PEDs, performance enhancement supplements, that you aren't ready to use, because the muscle growth, the muscle protein synthesis is going to happen faster than the tendons and ligaments, which is why most people should train without for as long as humanly possible, and then if they make that choice, they make that choice. But there isn't a rate of gain that you're going to get. Tendon and ligament health probably has more to do with your recovery, your nutrition, your hydration, believe it or not, for tendon health, the quality of your movement, and so forth, than it has anything else to do. Your tendons are really strong. They're meant to hold incredible load. It's when your mechanics or your fatigue levels get too high that they're at risk. Realistically,
you'll gain more strength being able to recover better than you will trying to like track what weight on the bar. Like you can consistently like progress every single week, but if you're not recovering from that, you are eventually going to break down. So your strength gains will be entirely dictated based off of how well you recover.
I was just having this conversation with, I think, Ian McKay, who owns Strong and Fitness too. I have so many conversations I forget who they were. We were talking about the rate of development that has nothing to do with what you do in the gym and everything to do with what you do outside of the gym.
I find that a lot of beginner lifters are so hyper focused on what they're doing inside the gym, and then they like go home and have like 800 calories, then they're sleeping 4 hours, and then they're drinking Mountain Dew, and I'm like, you're doing literally half, like you're doing 2% of what is important as far as lifting. Like, kudos to you for being like so energetic and stoked on going to the gym and like getting stronger or whatever, but like you can only, as a beginner, you can only keep that lack of recovery for so long before you get to a point where you're going to be stagnant there because you don't prioritize anything that's actually important.
Yeah, which is the recovery.
Yeah.
All right, so this was a question. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling down so I can see. Hey, I used to pull sumo wider with my feet turned out wider until I hurt my adductor, which forced me to move my stance closer and straighter. What can I do to get my legs out wider? And then he followed up with, I still feel pinches towards the adductor brevis. Well, that lets me know that you didn't have the mobility or the hip stability to lift that wide. So your body was probably dragging your knees in, using the adductors to move the weight instead of your quads to drive off the floor. It is too wide for your mobility, and it's also too wide for your stability. You weren't able to generate and create any torque from that position. I just demonstrated this at the last seminar we did, where I can actually go plate the plate on a deadlift bar and still get the bar off the floor, but there's about a 200-pound difference in how much I can pull that weight from bringing my feet just outside the ring sets as opposed to at the actual plates. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And if your body's giving you pain, it means it's awareness that it's beyond your body's loadable range of motion. There's a difference between passive range of motion and active range of motion, and you need to train within your body's active range of motion. Trying to go wider and wider and wider just to shorten your range of motion doesn't mean you're going to be stronger there. And chances are you're putting yourself in a detrimental position because you can't generate any hip torque there because you're too wide. You're at end range of motion, and your body's already let you know, hey, this is a really bad idea. So keep them in where you have them. You can work on flaring the toes back out by working on your hip mobility a little bit some, but I wouldn't try to move them back out. Your body made it very clear it's not mobile enough to go there.
Just because you stand wider doesn't mean it's going to be stronger. Like you said, yours is a 200-pound difference between standing wider and standing slightly closer. So just because it's super, super wide and it feels super short, you may not be able to lock that out. I don't love the super, super wide sumo. I can't do it, and I'm pretty mobile, and it just doesn't feel as powerful for me. But like things that I've liked recently have been those weighted Cossacks. I feel like those have been really, really helpful for feeling a little bit more mobile, for like strengthening my hips and my adductors. I like those a lot.
I love them. I'm secretly Russian by way of South Africa and New York. It works.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally Russian.
Same thing.
A great example of this is why wider doesn't necessarily work better. Now, obviously, we can't do this in a competition because it's not max legal. But if you were to grab a bar and bench with it with your hands at the collars, you're going to have no force production because you're all on the pecs and you have no tricep and front delt under there because they're in an elongated position and already in a shortened position, so there's nowhere for them to contract to. So if you were to bench collar to collar, it would significantly shorten the range of motion, but it's probably also going to knock 70 to 100 pounds off your actual bench press. There is a limiting factor into how short is too short as far as the muscle contraction. And we don't need to train peak contraction. We're not bodybuilders, we're powerlifters. We need to train force production. So where's your strongest force production? That's where you should be. Yes. You're welcome. Why does my adductor cramp while doing single leg quad work? Because your adductor is weak and needs more conditioning. So I'd focus more on bringing your adductor up with things like Copenhagen planks, the adductor machine, the good girl machine, right? Is it the good girl machine with your clothes?
It's good girls and the bad girls.
Bad girls open, good girls close?
Yeah, you want the close, the good girl close, right?
I want them both. Girls. No, but yeah, your adductor is probably weak and your quad is a little bit more dominant in that position. So you're doing single leg work, your adductor needs to come up. Something that's cramping like that means it's not conditioned. It's not conditioned to the position, it needs to come up. So I would actually increase your single leg work or increase more of the focus on strengthening your adductor specifically. All right?
I like it. I like wide stance Bulgarian split squats too.
Yeah, wide stance Bulgarian split squats work great because then you're sitting back and you're really using your adductor to propel you forward from the hip extension.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about progress since we got a lot of questions and that's pretty good. So progress, what does that mean to me is I'm always moving forward, and I hesitate to say always moving forward because like we talk about deloads, there are times you have to take a step back. What is measurable progress? And the problem I see when we measure progress is people are looking from a day-to-day scale instead of a month-to-month, year-to-year, and a longer time span. So like if somebody has a goal, they want to total 2,000, they're at like 1,300, it's not likely they're going to total 2,000 next year. But if they were willing to gain a significant amount of muscle mass, gain a significant amount of weight, and maybe move them to reps, and maybe they had a 5-year plan, that goal becomes more realistic. But that doesn't mean they aren't making progress in those 5 years. But if they're tracking their progress from the time they're at 1,300, and then tomorrow, like, well, I'm not stronger, it's tomorrow, it's not how it works. So we're not looking in progress in a long enough scope to see if we can measure it. So if you were the same strength today that you were last year, it probably wasn't the most ideal training year unless you had an injury or something wrong, and maybe you need to make some changes, and those changes may not be in the gym, they might be outside of the gym. How's your nutrition? How's your sleep? How's your recovery? How's your hydration? So when we're looking at measuring progress, let's look at measuring change. Mm-hmm. What have you changed in a positive direction towards achieving progress? Because everyone's like, I want to be stronger. I want to be better. I want to have better technique. If you want something you've never had, you're going to probably have to sacrifice something to make that change and get rid of something. People talk about time. I don't have enough time. But you've watched Schitt's Creek on Netflix or whatever. So
it's a good show.
It's funny-ish. I get bored. But what did you change and what did you sacrifice to get that? So progress comes at a cost, right? We don't just get progress. We pay for progress. What cost have you given up to achieve progress? Mm-hmm. What do you think on that?
Well, I like what you said about the time thing, right? Because as I mentioned earlier with talking about Chelsea Sumo, is I give her one cue to focus on at a time. And that can be really, really boring probably as an athlete to hear me say the same cue over and over again, or to say like, okay, you hit the cue good this week, let's aim to make it autonomous next week. And then they're so hyper-focused on that one session that they're not looking at the fact that like one block of training is generally focused on one specific thing with each movement, right? So that could be one cue, that could be one sticking point, whatever you want to call it, one area of opportunity that you're trying to improve. So one block can be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. I generally write mine in 4. So for that 4-week block, I'm focusing on one thing for that lifter, and that's generally the only thing that I want to talk about. So the lifter gets so caught up in like, well, this session today I didn't apply it very, very well. But then by week 4, maybe they did apply it really well, and it is autonomous, and it is something that they don't have to think about anymore, and it's something that they're automatically doing. That was the whole goal of that block. But lifters get so caught up in that one session. When they have one bad day, they think about that one bad day all week. Like let's say they failed a squat rep. They failed a squat rep on Monday, and on Saturday they're still like, I'm so bummed still about missing that squat rep. That was so many days ago. That should be so gone from your memory, and that does not matter for the weeks going forward. And like, if we train 5 days a week all year, like you fail 1 day a week, that's only 20% of your training. Yeah. Who cares?
The only day yesterday matters was yesterday.
Yeah. So I think that with this whole progress thing is like, it is very short-sighted, and like, you may think, okay, well, I didn't get stronger month to month. Okay, what about 6 months from now? What about 1 year from now? I really, really hate the short term. We want a short term memory with bad things. We always talk about that. Mm-hmm. But we do want to have like a longer term memory when it comes to the good. We want to think about what we're going to do in 6 months from now and 1 year from now. Majority of people want to be doing this for longer than 6 months, right? So if you plan on wanting to do this for years and years and years, or until you can, you have to be focused on the fact of like, okay, I plan on doing this for 20 years. So does 1 day or 1 week or 1 block really even necessarily matter if you weren't perfect? No, it doesn't matter. And that's what...
It's got a 5-year plan. Sorry, there had to be an Adam Sandler quote.
What is it, not die?
There had to be an Adam Sandler quote here somewhere, right?
It's got old balls.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because everyone's like, I want to do this forever. But they don't train that way, and they don't think that way. So 1 day doesn't matter in the scope of forever.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's interesting to me when lifters are like, oh, I want to do this for as long as I possibly can, but my life is falling apart with this one bad session.
Do you know how long you possibly can do this? Forever. You know, as long as you're alive. Every other week, some like granny goes viral for squatting 600 pounds, or I'm being facetious, but she squatted like 300 pounds in briefs, but like she's still doing it.
No, there was a 56-year-old woman who squatted raw 352.
See?
Mm-hmm.
She's better than you.
Yeah.
You know what she's focused on? Tomorrow, not today.
Yeah. I think that's...
You know why? She values her time much more because she has less of it. That's a little mean, but it's true. She has less time left, so she really prioritizes her shit to make sure she's doing it right on time.
I find that there are a lot of type A, really highly neurotic lifters within powerlifting, which is so funny to me because, like, nothing is ever going to be perfect. Like, if you expect to be perfect under a 1 rep max, you probably didn't hit a 1 rep max.
I was about to say, if it was perfect, it wasn't your 1 rep max.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that there are so many type A neurotic powerlifters when nothing of what maximal strength is really necessarily about is perfect technique. Yeah, like, that's what you want to aim for. I'm not saying just lift like a fucking asshole. Like, obviously lift with intent and lift with technique, but if you're going for an all-out max weight that you have never hit before and expecting it to be perfect, and then being like, oh, I hit a 20-pound PR and it wasn't perfect, what the fuck? Like,
thank you all for telling me to stop being a little bitch.
You're welcome.
In so many words.
Yeah. If you like hit a 20-pound PR and you're like, oh, well, that wasn't perfect, so I don't like it. Shut up. Like, if I were your training partner, I'd probably tell you to shut up. You just hit a 20-pound PR.
I get that every week. Somebody hits a PR and they're pissed off with it.
Oh,
like, I could have done this better. Like, dude, you just PR'd.
Yeah, even if it's a volume
Which
PR.
Which was the goal, to get progress.
Right. Even if it's like a volume PR, like a 5 rep max, 3 rep max, or whatever, and people are like, oh, well, this was a PR, but my knees caved. And I'm like, dude, I don't care.
Yeah,
You hit a PR. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Congratulations on achieving the goal. Stop picking on it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I made $1 million this year, but I could have made 1.2.
You just sound like an asshole.
You really do.
just pissing me off.
All right. So remember, we go live every Thursday. I think we might travel next Thursday, so we'll have to figure that out. Maybe we'll go live on Wednesday, but we'll notify everybody ahead of time.
If we have Wi-Fi, it's not like we're going like off the grid in like a cabin in the middle of the
True.
woods. We're in a house, so we have Wi-Fi.
No, I think actually next week we're in a cabin in the middle of the woods.
We're not.
We're not in Tennessee next week?
No, we are, but it's not in the middle of the woods.
Damn it, I want in the middle of the woods. But this weekend, if you're watching us on Instagram, we will be in Strong Hand Fitness in North Carolina. Asheville?
No,
Hendersonville. Hendersonville. Yeah, so Hendersonville. By the time you listen to this Monday, if you listen to the podcast, it'll be gone. But the following weekend, I will be in Tennessee at Southside Strength and Conditioning. So if you want to attend that seminar, send me a DM. I'll send you the sign-up link. You can meet us in Tennessee, and we'll be there an extra day because it's pretty. So we're staying an extra day. And I appreciate you all for tuning in. Anything you want to add to that?
No.
I think you have the hello down, but I have the goodbye.
Well, yeah, but you always try to take the hello from me because you think that you're the most important thing ever.
I want it all. I want it all.
And you want to push me out of the picture.
I want it right now. Willy Wonka.
And you want to push me out of the
I
picture?
do not want to push you in the picture. You make the picture.
Oh, you're right.
There you go. See? All right. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.